Here on a rainy day, it's good to talk with you again. Tomorrow is Father's Day. We honor our fathers, those that's still with us and those that's passed on. Certainly the father being the figure in our life that taught us, that made sure that we could live, made a living for us. This is not always the case as just the father does this, the mother, but these two events, Mother's Day and Father's Day, are interchangeable. A lot of the same traits in both figures in our families, but today is the special day that we honor our fathers. Have some scriptures to talk about from Paul's second letters to the church at Corinth, chapter 6, verse 1 through 13. You can imagine that the Apostle Paul, as the scriptures don't say he ever had any children, or that he was married even, but his children in life, as it is with so many men in life, is what they accomplished. And certainly he worked hard in what he had been called by God to do, and that's preach the good news of Jesus Christ all around the Mediterranean, that part of the world being certainly so much reception for the gospel of Jesus Christ among the Gentiles and some of the Jews, but Paul saw himself as a father to so many churches that he helped start. And with all that hard work that he did, it's obvious that he didn't want all of his work, all of his preaching, all of his hardships to be in vain, that he could be proud and about his churches that were growing. And so in these particular scriptures he talks about that, hoping that none of these churches would fail to fully accept his preaching, not just his preaching, but what he was preaching about. Verse 1 in chapter 6. As we work together with him, we urge you also not to accept the grace of God in vain. So here Paul talks about the togetherness and just how important it was that through the grace of God that they had heard the good news, and they had made their vows. All of them had made their Christian vows and a part of their churches, and that they know just how great this was, that they could accept this grace of a loving God, and that they could be saved, and that they could go on and spend eternity by the way that God provided through Jesus Christ. In verse 2, for he says, he's quoting somewhere in the Old Testament, at an acceptable time I have listened to you, and on a day of salvation I have helped you. So God had been listening over the ages. At this particular time in history, people were distraught because many were suffering hardships due to political domination by the Romans. Many of them were in poverty, and many of them had been trapped in religions that really offered them nothing. So here comes Paul delivering his messages, and now they know that Jesus Christ, that he lived, that he died and was resurrected. And this is grace. This is a free gift. And then verse 2, the rest of verse 2, see, now is the acceptable time. It's time for you to make changes in your life, he was telling the church at Corinth. See, now is the day of salvation. In other words, it's not to be put off. It's to be accepted, this free gift. It's to be taken in. It's to be allowed to be changed through Jesus Christ. To be a new creation of people. And now was the time, as Paul was talking to him. It's today. It's the day of the Lord in a sense, which is not one particular day, but a time, an era, that this was going on in their lives, and they should be excited and very thankful. Paul goes on to write in verse 3, we, talking about he and his co-workers, we are putting no obstacle in anyone's way, so that no fault may be found with our ministry. In other words, they're doing the best job. They're doing without any kind of fault, doing what they have been called to do, to bring people into the fold of Jesus Christ. And so they haven't put any obstacle in anybody's way. All they've got to do is accept it and act on it. Goes on in verse 4, but as servants of God, we have commended ourselves in every way through great endurance. And listen to the things that Paul and his co-workers had went through and had endured. In afflictions, hardships, calamities, beatings, imprisonments, riots, labors, sleepless nights, hunger. In verse 6, by purity, knowledge, patience, kindness, holiness of spirit, genuine love. Verse 7, he adds truthful speech and the power of God, with the weapons of righteousness for the right hand and for the left, in honor and dishonor, in ill repute and good repute. So all these things that Paul had went through, certainly he was concerned that it had not been in vain, that it was not just some footnotes of history to be read and then forgotten about, but that what he was doing, he prayed and he hoped that it was for the good of those that he spoke to, that he preached to, that he went to see several times, that all of this would be a great product of diligent preaching, that the church, which he dearly loved, would grow, and that nobody would find any kind of stumbling block in him or those that helped him, that they would accept the good news, and that they would accept the gift of salvation freely given, and go on as the church remained. That was in Paul's heart quite a bit. And so he took time to write about this, his feelings about this, that they would not have all that he done and those that helped him, and they themselves had done, that it would be in vain. You know, today we sometimes, in this world of troubles, stormy weather for our Christian faith, we all would hope that all the things that we have done, that we have given, that we have shared, that it wouldn't be in vain, that this whole experience of the Christian church would not be in vain, that we've made a difference in the world. We all feel like that. I know I'm at my third church. Spent a number of years preaching and teaching, and I love each church that I've been at, and would certainly not have in any way this troubling thought that all that I've done has been in vain, that I've made a difference. That's what's important in our faith, that we work in the vineyard of God, which is not just in our church, but our whole communities, that we work in the vineyard of God, and it satisfies us when we see the fruit of all this, that none of this would be in vain, and that nobody let any kind of obstacles stand in their way. It's about making a difference in the world. We are treated as impostors, Paul writes, and yet are true, as unknown, and yet are well known, as dying, and see, look at us, Paul writes, we are alive, as punished, and yet not killed, as sorrowful yet always rejoicing, as poor yet making many rich, as having nothing and yet possessing everything. This is a testimony to Paul's faith, knowing that he had been led by the Spirit here and there and everywhere in his ministry, that he had suffered a lot physically and mentally, but yet he felt like what he did was important. And he said at one other point in another one of his letters that he would have turned everything that he had ever gained before he became a preacher and evangelist, he would have turned it back for this, because he felt like even though he wasn't rich, he was rich in another way. He possessed everything, and that's how we should feel. No matter how much we have materially, what we do for the church, what we do in our faith to increase the benefit and the survival of the church, it allows us to feel like the joy of all of this, that we really possess everything. Paul goes on to write in in verse 11, we have spoken frankly to you, Corinthians. Our heart is wide open to you. There is no restriction in our affections, but only in yours. In other words, we haven't restricted anything. We've did what was right to do. If anything is short, it's on your hands, what you have done in your response. In verse 13, in return I speak as to children. Open wide your hearts also. Paul wanted them to be dedicated as he was, that they would carry on, that after he passed on, that the work of the church would carry on, and it has. Look at us today. We're beneficiaries of certainly what Jesus did for the most, but also what Paul did. Go with this great understanding and this great joy. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.